Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for a Tuesday, April the 12th, 2022. First topic today is the only question, the only political question, the only really important political question today, which is, will our countries survive? I'm reminded in Martin Scorsese's film about the Dalai Lama, Kundan, we see him meeting the Dalai Lama with Mao Zedong. And Mao Zedong tells the Dalai Lama that any resistance the Tibetans put up against the Chinese, the Han Chinese, it's a waste of time. How? Why? Because Mao Zedong intends to flood Tibet with as many Han Chinese as possible, thus taking away their country for them. An example of what's become known as the Great Replacement. And so it happened. Here's a story yesterday from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A banner that said British to be minority by 2066 was flown over the Premier League football match between Manchester City and Liverpool yesterday afternoon. A light airplane carried the banner over Etihad Stadium, prompting an outpouring of condemnation on Twitter. Although it used the word British, the banner was obviously referring to white people becoming a minority in Britain within 50 years. Who pays for these racist banners to be flown over the Etihad? Seriously, F off, reacted one person. And we have a tweet from Klaus Arminis commenting on the sign saying recently reports by the government finds the British will become a minority before 2070 due to immigration. 2066 is oddly specific, another respondent observed. However, the date is a reference to a study cited by Professor David Coleman of Oxford University, which was reported on by the British media back in 2010. Coleman said white British people would make up less than half the population in little more than 50 years, adding that this would change national identity. The Daily Mail reported at the time, quote, if immigration stays at its long-term rate of around 180,000 a year, the white British-born population would decline to from 80% of the total now to just 59% in 2051. Analysis of figures from the Office of National Statistics shows, unquote, white British people are already a minority in the capital city of London. The 2011 census showed that 44.9% were white British, a number that will almost certainly have decreased when the results of the 2021 census are revealed later this year. During a Premier League match at the height of the Black Lives Matter riots back in 2020, a banner was flown above a match during Manchester City's game at Burnley, which said, White Lives Matter Burnley. So, yes, we're back to Schrodinger's cat again. That thing is definitely not happening, but it's a good thing that it is, except when bad people notice, and then it becomes bad again. What are you talking about? White people becoming a minority in Britain. That is to say, Britons becoming a minority in Britain. What are you talking about? Oh, yeah, okay, sure, but that's a good thing because white people are bad. Now, of course, the white people in Britain are overwhelmingly indigenous to that island, but that apparently doesn't make any difference. The argument against white people in Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand is that they were settlers or colonizers. But when it comes to white people in Britain or France or Germany or Spain or Italy or whatever, the fact that they are indigenous, again, it doesn't matter. The whole point is that white people must be punished. That's what diversity means. Quite simply, white people must be punished. Now, here is a relevant story. Again, from the same source, Summit News. This is from Steve Watson yesterday. Former Obama Homeland Security head Jeh Johnson. Yes, it's spelled J-E-H, but it's pronounced Jeh. He warned Sunday that unmanageable numbers of illegal immigrants will pour across the southern border if the Biden administration lifts the Title 42 Public Health Authority. The measure, which Biden intends to scrap in May, has effectively served as border control allowing federal immigration officials to swiftly return around 2 million illegal immigrants to their home countries over the past 2 years. Without it, it is conservatively estimated that numbers of migrants reaching the border will increase threefold to 18,000 per day. Appearing on CBS News, Johnson warned that, quote, numbers at these levels are difficult to handle on the southern border. Communities on the southern border, Catholic Charities, the volunteers, difficult to absorb these types of numbers almost any scenario. It's challenging for the Border Patrol, for ICE to properly process and track these individuals. And obviously, the Biden administration is paying a political cost for these. Well, it's an outright invasion at this point. And frankly, it doesn't matter whether the invasion is legal or illegal. The result is always the same. I saw it suggested that the Biden administration, or who's ever running the Biden administration, certainly not putting head Joe Biden, have written off the 2022 midterms in November of this year and are looking at the 2024 elections and beyond. People who are admitted in the United States legally can become citizens within 5 years. And of course, there's going to be a tremendous push to create as many paper citizens as possible to give the Democratic Party a permanent lock on the presidency and increasingly on both houses of Congress. And here is something from Mark Stein's column at Stein Online, Le Pen contre le déluge. He makes an interesting point, which several others had made in the last week. Say what you will about La République Française, but unlike America, its election operations are not a rusted, malodorous sewer of brazenly corrupt practices. So the election was held, the votes were counted in hours, and the official result was known by 1 a.m. Paris time. There are no unmarked vans motoring the Dordogne or the Pas-de-Calais in the dead of night, bearing additional votes sufficient to the need. That speaks well for any nation. Alas, not much else about Sunday's vote does. The top three is as follows: Emmanuel Macron at 27.6%, Marine Le Pen at 23.4%, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon at 22%. Stein comments, Mademoiselle Le Pen is designated by the BBC far right and Monsieur Mélenchon hard left. I am unclear whether in Beeb parlance it's worse to be hard than far. But be that as it may, they could at least cease applying the label mainstream to candidates who can't crack 5%, which is the threshold below which your election expenses are not covered by the French state. On Friday's Clubland Q&A, Stein continues, I mentioned en passant that I'm all about the urgency. The West will die unless we change what we're doing very fast. Yes, indeed. Time is running out. If people care about our countries and our nations surviving in any recognizable form, action this day. It has definitely come to that. Again, from Summit News, which has been very valuable to this live stream, from Steve Watson, a Washington Post columnist suggested Monday that the magic solution to rampant inflation and supply chain impediments would be to allow more illegal immigrants into the country. Catherine Rampel wrote a piece titled that Democrats are missing the bigger immigration issue, noting that Democrats are terrified that a coming border surge might tank their midterm chances. She then went on to suggest that problems will occur not with too many immigrants, but rather too few. Rampel claims, without any evidence or authority, that inflation will start to recede if there are more migrants who can fill critical labor market shortages. She writes, the United States is experiencing inflationary levels not seen in 4 decades. Americans are unhappy, and they are more than 5 times as likely to cite inflation, cost of living, or the economy in general than immigration as the nation's biggest problem. These economic concerns are, however, rooted at least partly in immigration policy. She continues, there remains a huge demand among foreign-born workers to contribute to the U.S. economy, adding the many businesses that rely on these workers are losing critical staff, making inflation worse. That's not how inflation works. Inflation derives from the inflation of the money supply. She concludes that more immigration will only benefit Americans financially and, by extension, Democrats' political fortunes. I guess that's a win-win, right? Of course, the notion that supply chain problems are solely to blame for inflation is moronic. As Harvard economist and former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has repeatedly pointed out, inflation is a direct cause of the Federal Reserve being behind the curve on interest rates and the Biden administration's massive increase in spending, including the $1.9 trillion COVID relief legislation. As noted yesterday, Biden intends to scrap the Title 42 Public Health Authority, which border officials have estimated will increase the number of immigrants traveling to the border threefold to 18,000 per day. Yes, it was in the late 1990s when Alan Greenspan, the genius who brought us Capitalism 2.0, he noted that immigration will have to be kept high in order to keep wages low. Now, why it was such a necessity to keep wages low is a very good question. Presumably, members of the middle class, who aren't in government, members of the working class are scum, and they deserve to be punished. I don't really think there's any other way to look at this. Immigration was largely choked when Trump was president, and then there was the COVID hysteria, which also contributed to that, with the result that American wages went up, which is a good thing, right? No, that is not a good thing. Certainly not for the 1%. They might have to put off purchase of another ivory back scratcher. The blue ticks hate the guts of ordinary Americans and Canadians. Again, from our favorite source, and Paul Joseph Watson, a BBC guide for parents written by a far-left Black Lives Matter activist tells parents to examine their biases and educate their toddler about racism if they only have Black friends. Yes, really. The guide was written by author and activist Uju Asika, who previously asserted that the royal family is racist and is sitting on a legacy of global subjugation, pillaging, and slave trading wealth. Did your family express negative thoughts about foreigners and immigrants? Asked the guide, which is posted on the BBC's Tiny Happy People website. What is your social circle like today? Does your child have Black or brown friends over playdates? Could you be doing more? For white moms and dads, it might be time to examine your own internal biases. Parents are urged to indoctrinate themselves about the hidden prejudices via books and TV shows. They're also asked to talk to their kids about how being white might give you certain advantages. For instance, you are more likely to see people who look like you on TV. Watson comments, this is patently absurd, given that Black and brown people are vastly overrepresented on British television and movies and TV commercials. Well, it's even worse in my country of Canada, or when I see Canadian TV commercials. Are there any white people left in Canada? Are there any white couples left in Canada? Whites are still about 2/3 of the population of Canada, but on television, particularly on commercials, they're down to 30, 20%, something like that. What is the purpose of this? The purpose of this is psychological warfare. The purpose is to give people the impression that it's all over, you've lost, you're going to get it in the neck now. The great replacement has already happened. So there's no point in arguing against further crippling levels of third world immigration because they are the captain now. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan, Anran, Dionysus, Tom Anderson. Dionysus says, hope Zemmour will do good for France. Well, yes. Marine Le Pen, you see, her political party it's a family foundation. And apparently, well, first her father, then her. And how dare that Eric Zemmour run, because she owns the right. She has already announced, after Zemmour announced his support for her in the second round, that she rejected the support and saying that Zemmour and Maréchal Le Pen, her niece, would not be given positions in any Marine Le Pen administration. Yes, a spiteful, spiteful woman. Hello to Chogokin 666, Oscar Toe, David the Gnome. There is no way they have just written off the midterm, says Oscar Toe. What in the left psyche says they are just going to forfeit this one and let the right gain a lot of power? Well, we shall see. We shall see. Tricky Who says, how dare native whites want to remain majority in their country? Zamor only getting 7% was pretty dismal, says Anne Run. Tom Anderson says, those in power want all of this. Remember the Sam Hyde quote? Yes, I do, indeed. Yes, they want us homeless and our children raped and starving, and they think it's funny. That's an approximation. Zen Master Football Analyst says, hello, boyos and KMG made it back to the UK, no longer in the Philippines. I hope Elon Musk takes over Twitter, says Dionysus. Well, he has announced that he is not going to be sitting on the board. And if he had taken a board seat, this would have restricted him to only 14.9% of the company, not just up for the period that he was on the board, for something like 6 months afterwards, like 2.5 years. So he may be looking to take a majority stake. Tricky Who points out that Marine Le Pen did the same to her own father, who subsequently endorsed Eric Zemmour. Oscar Toe says Macron seems to be in good shape. Well, yeah, it's rather remarkable, seeing as that very few people like him. The only people who like him are those people who benefit directly thereby. Hello to William Hicks. Dionysus says, I will never submit. He'll beat Le Pen comfortably in round 2, I think. I like your tie, Kevin, says Oscar Toe. Well, thank you. I suppose I should talk about Canada now, because we are being replaced in the country that we made. Well, of course, it's not happening, but it's a good thing that it is. This is a really remarkable story from Tonda McCharles at the Toronto Star. Today, in fact, Brown vows to lift Tamil Tigers ban. Conservative leadership candidate Patrick Brown says he will lift the ban on the designated terrorist organization known as the Tamil Tigers, open up immigration to, quote, any Tamil family that wants to come to Canada, and as Prime Minister would apologize for Canada's failure to help Tamil refugees as it has Ukrainians or the Vietnamese boat people. In a short video viewed by the Star, the Brampton mayor appeals to Tamil community representatives, telling them he needs their help in order to win the leadership of the federal Conservative Party, because the people he has to beat are the same people who put the ban on the Tamil Tigers. Brown suggested his sympathies for the Tamil community have led him to be branded by the Sri Lankan High Commission in Canada as LTTE, which stand for Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, otherwise known as the Tamil Tigers. Stephen Harper's Conservative government was in power when Canada listed the Tamil Tigers as a terrorist organization in 2006. That designation was reviewed and confirmed by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government in 2018. A little background here. The war that broke out in Sri Lanka between the majority Buddhists and the minority Tamils, a very bloody war with atrocities on both sides, led, for some stupid, typically Canadian reason, with hundreds of thousands of Tamils coming halfway around the world to Canada. Instead of, say, how about an Indian state called Tamil Nadu, which is just a stone's throw from the tip of Sri Lanka. The Tamil Tigers the Tamils have rather significant political power in Ontario, particularly in the Greater Toronto region, where there are estimated, 400,000 of them, something like that. And Stephen Harper, whose party had made a big deal out of condemning the Liberals, including Paul Martin, for their support of the Tamil Tiger terrorists, Stephen Harper decided to suck up to the Tamils. And he announced that Canada would not be attending the Asia Pacific meeting, which was scheduled for the capital of Sri Lanka, because the Buddhists had been so mean to the Tamil Tigers, and Canada wasn't going to stand for that. Yeah, once again, these politicians who say they're anti-terrorist, no, they're not. Not one of them is. Let's see. Oh, yes, the Tamils were stereotypes, says Patrick Brown. Patrick Brown, mentioned previously, I interviewed him when he was something like 22 years old, when he was on the city council in Barrie, Ontario, and was making a name for himself in conservative circles, Unite the Right. He was an MP there, and Brampton is a long distance from Barrie, but guess what? The Phantom Ethnic Army showed up to make Patrick Brown mayor of Brampton, Ontario. And what are the idiots who write political columns in Canada don't understand, or they're not willing to say, that it's not ordinary members of the Conservative Party who are going to determine who the leader is. It's going to be phantom ethnic armies, which are very largely fake and illegal. But apparently it's racist and xenophobic to talk about this. Brown is a formidable political organizer, according to the Star. He refers to different immigration streams, saying, I want to reunite as many Tamil families as possible immediately. Well, if he really wanted to reunite them, he would send those in Canada back home. Brown notes how quickly the Canadian government has moved to fast-track Ukrainian refugees, adding, I'm glad how Canada is helping Ukraine. How is this helping Ukraine exactly? For where there's a will, there's a way. And so my goal is to make sure that every Tamil family that wants to be reunited and any Tamil family that wants to come to Canada, as part of this apology, we're going to welcome with open arms and say, sorry for what you had to go through. No, the Conservative Party is the enemy of Canada, just as much so, if not more, than the Liberal Party. Never forget that it was Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney who made so-called family reunification the top priority in immigration policy. And this resulted, or Mulroney decided, that there would be record numbers of immigrants coming to the country, with the result, that Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal are no longer majority Canadian. How about that? And we have all these, Canada is just filling up with all these people that hate each other. Canada is quickly moving towards the worst political organization, which is the war of all against all. So what does one of Canada's leading political PR spivs have to say about our immigration policy? Again, the Toronto Star, a newspaper that hates Canada with a passion. This is Robin V. Sears, described as an NDP strategist for 20 years and later served as a communication advisor to businesses and governments on 3 continents. Yes, PR spiv. His column on Sunday is called The Treatment of Newcomers Under Canada's Immigration System is Frankly Appalling. Imagine if you had to wait 3 years for a response from a corporate customer service department, or you're in line with 1.8 million others waiting for a call or an email from a government agency or business. Imagine desperately checking your phone every day for 3 years. This is what keen progressive immigrants are subject to under Canada's immigration system. Set aside the scandal of how Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada bungled the rescue and transport of Afghan and now Ukrainian refugees. We were told that translators were going to come to Canada from Afghanistan. Did every soldier, Canadian soldier, have his own translator or half a dozen translators? Because the numbers don't reflect that. The Liberals are cynically using these refugee crises as an excuse to hasten the Great Replacement. Bungled the rescue and transport of Ukrainian refugees. The war isn't even 2 months old. Now get this. These 1.8 million people are candidates who have passed an initial screening. You cannot screen people from a failed state, and Afghanistan is a failed state. We know nothing about these people and have the skills to integrate quickly. I would suggest that Robin V. Sears is trolling us. Maybe he believes this fatuous nonsense. The skills? What skills? People who don't speak, mostly, who are not going to speak French or English, with little or no education, with low IQs from a civilization that is almost stone age. They have the skills to integrate quickly. We have the data on immigrants to Canada from all sources. And Professor Herbert Grubel, or Emeritus Professor Herbert Grubel from Simon Fraser University, has run the numbers. Immigrants are a net detriment economically and rather significantly to the tunes of thousands of dollars a year for each Canadian. He continues, these are people we have encouraged to come to Canada. Why? Through years of promoting our openness, tolerance, and enthusiasm to newcomers. As one of the world's most successful immigrant nations, our birth rate is too low to even maintain, let alone grow our population. Why might that be? Might one reason be that white Canadians don't want to their children grow up in a hostile, rebarbative environment, and that Canadians are being priced out of their cities by immigration, which is 1.3 million? No, sorry, like 1.7 million over the last 4 years. How about that, huh? There's also close to around 500,000 others who come to Canada, supposedly on a temporary basis, many of whom simply refuse to leave, and it's almost impossible to get rid of them. These would-be newcomers are our only guarantee of a prosperous future. Oh, yes, it's like the old joke that, yes, we lose money on every immigrant, but we're going to make it up in volume. Again, Robin V. Sears is a PR spiv. So, yes, he is at the Earnscliffe Strategy Group. The question is, does he have any pecuniary reason or reasons to support high levels of third world immigration to Canada? I think we should be told, but the Toronto Star doesn't think that it is any of our business. Jamie Watt, there's another PR spiv. He also writes for the Toronto Star, part of the gay PR spiv cabal that runs the Conservative Party of Canada. And I'm now going to move on to, yes, Canada, the country of universal mental retardation. This is by Erica Ibrahim at the Canadian Press. Feds move forward on menstrual equity in budget. Advocates want it done right. Menstrual equity. You see, women have periods. No, wait, I could get in trouble for that, but I'll have more on that later. And men don't. Wait, I could get in trouble for that too, actually. So apparently this is a problem. I could point out that men shave and women don't. Yes, most women shave their legs and their underarms, but not every day. So that is to say that men pay a great deal more than women in terms of electric and manual razors and new blades and such like. But let's not get into that. Over 6 months ago, since the Liberals committed to creating a menstrual equity fund, the federal government has proposed the pilot project in its 2022 budget. Starting in 2022, the government would give $25 million over 2 years to create a national pilot that helps make menstrual products available to Canadians. Is there a shortage of them? They don't sell them at Shoppers Drug Mart or Save On Foods or Loblaws or Sobeys or whatever. That has not been my understanding. Women and Gender Equality Canada will be in charge of creating the project. Okay, let's count the NGOs. Kevin Hebert, Director of Business Development at Changing the Flow. That's one. So apparently there's an NGO called Changing the Flow. I wonder where it gets its money from. So the groups directly affected by lack of access should lead the discussion on how to get menstrual equity right. This would mean reaching out to people who are racialized, gender nonconforming, disabled, and experience other forms of marginalization, Hebert said. Go to where they are and say, what does solving period poverty look like to you? Banvi Sajdeva, youth advocate for Plan International Canada, that's NGO number 2, said this work should be sure to meet the needs of those groups while also keeping the climate in mind. Urge to kill in Minecraft rising. This means moving away from single-use period products to reusable ones, Sajdeva said. I don't know whether Banvi is a male or female name. Is this person serious about this? You want to throw them away for reasons I don't need to explain to anybody. Pawasha Ali, noticing a trend here, advocacy co-chair for Bleed the North, that's NGO number 3, said she's noticed similar government programs are often gendered and hit the bare minimum standard for equity. There's a diverse array of individuals with different gender identities, with different experiences who go through menstruation. Yeah, it's not women anymore. The mandate later for Women and Gender Equality Minister Marcy Ian tasked her with creating a fund so that nonprofits and shelters could make products freely available to vulnerable women. Ooh, problematic term. The budget did away with the gendered reference and instead said the fund would help Canadians in need. NDP MP Leah Gazan, critic for women and gender equality, said Monday that these products should be treated as an essential hygiene product, like toilet paper. Why did she mention toilet paper? Men and women use toilet paper. Everyone uses toilet paper. It's about dignity and ensuring people have what they need to live in dignity. And that includes menstrual hygiene products, especially for those who can't afford it. Oh, so what are we looking at here? 10 to 20 bucks a month? Something like that? Now let's hear from a useless conservative. MP Karen Vecchio, the conservative critic for women and gender equality, said Tuesday that she does not support a subsidy for menstrual products and would want to approach the problem differently. Yes, capitalism is going to solve this problem. Is that a subsidy so that we're still paying $10 for a box of tampons? Or are we going to try to start doing something different? Like what? Vecchio said she would want to look further at the root causes that explain why menstrual products get priced so high, whether it be due to tariffs, boo, or markups along the supply chain. People are making money off of people who need these products. Did she know how the market works? How about food? People go to the stores and they pay money for that. Isn't that outrageous? Let's see. Oh, the root causes, indeed. I don't think it's a government fix, she said. The problem is with these evil people who are making money off of people who need certain products. Yen said that on March 22nd in the House of Commons, she is consulting with organizations, NGOs, trebles all round, about menstrual equity to inform their work. Riyadh Nazarali, noticing a trend, a spokesperson in Yen's office said in a statement Wednesday that the minister and her team have started consulting with educational institutions, businesses, not-for-profits, and other government departments. When asked if Yen would be creating a formalized consultation process, Nazarali did not directly answer, but said they will continue holding consultations to make menstrual equality a reality. Hebert of Changing the Flow said consultations would be worth doing if they're meant to find out what people using the fund would need and to use those findings to better meet those needs. Yeah, so they're spending, $25 million here on consulting. They could simply say that, the big government rebate, say, but that would mean that all those wonderful NGOs and useless parasitic civil servants would be cut out of the process. Oh, Gabrielle Trepanier, another advocacy co-chair with Bleed the North, said she thinks there's absolutely a need for a full consultation. Yes, can't have enough consultation to make sure the program is successful for every type of person it is trying to reach. The information that circulates on menstruation does not only highlight all people who experience it. No, I'm sorry. It's women, and it's only women. Oftentimes we have folks. Canadians have started using this word folks. Well, elite Canadians. Only Americans used that previously. Folks, no. And folks, typically Southerners actually would use the word folks. But now people like NGO Spiv, Gabrielle Trepanier, uses folks, I guess to show just how folksy she is. Folks like Indigenous folks or people who have menstrual disabilities who get missed in these programs because there isn't that lengthy consultation. Again, Canada, the country of universal mental retardation. This is from Marie Wolfe of the Canadian Press. This is a very disturbing story. Holocaust denial is to be outlawed in Canada in a further effort to stamp out rising anti-Semitism. The federal government is set to make it a criminal offense to make a statement denying the Holocaust took place or condoning or downplaying the killing of Jews by the Nazi regime, except in a private conversation. Ministers plan to use a bill enacting the budget to swiftly change the criminal code, budget documents show. What can I say about this? There's not very many people who talk of Holocaust denial anymore, for the reason that the Holocaust is disappearing from the folk memory. World War II ended in 1945, which was 77 years ago, almost 4 generations. As it turns out, I stand by the research of the great Raoul Hilberg, whose magisterial book, The Destruction of the European Jews, concluded that 5.1 million of them were murdered by the Nazis. Yes, what was it? Back in the 80s, say, in the 90s, there were Holocaust denial journals and the like, and conferences, and people lost interest in that, which is a good thing, actually. But now the government of Canada is determined to make this a conversation again and to throw fuel onto the fire that there is a belief among some that it is best to never criticize the Jews, if you like, or even individual Jews like George Soros, which apparently to even mention George Soros in a negative way is to be guilty of anti-Semitism, that don't say anything that the Jews don't like or they will hurt you. They will ruin your career. They will ruin you socially. And now in Canada, they will send you to prison. Is this more or less likely to reduce anti-Semitism in Canada? Canada will join a string of European countries, including Germany, yes, that bastion of freedom, Greece, France, Belgium, and the Czech Republic, which have already prohibited Holocaust denial. Yes, distortion. What does that mean? Does that mean to say, for instance, that Stalin killed more people than Hitler, or that Mao Zedong killed more people than both of them? Is that Holocaust denial? Some people insist that the Holocaust is a unique event in world history. I don't believe it is. There are many demonstrable Holocausts in human history, and some of them fairly recently. Genocides, let's say. But if one is to say that that the Holocaust of the Jews must be interpreted against other genocides, would that fall afoul of this law? I suspect it would. Erwin Kotler, who seems to be in charge of all this sort of thing, he's a longtime former MP. He's the Prime Minister's special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. The budget earmarked $5.6 million over 5 years to support Kotler's office. Well, nice work if you can get it. Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino said there is no place for anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial in Canada. The government move to change the law follows the introduction by Saskatoon Tory MP Kevin Waugh of a private member's bill prohibiting Holocaust denial earlier this year. Oh, the Conservative MP, said there is no place for racism in this country. Yes, I'm waiting, and I will continue to wait for Black people in Canada and for Asians in Canada who routinely express hatred of white people, even eliminationist hatred of white people, for them to feel the slightest bit of a discomfort. Waugh's bill proposes up to 2 years in prison. The budget set aside more than $70 million for initiatives benefiting Canada's Jewish community. This includes $20 million for the relocation and expansion of the Montreal Holocaust Museum and $2.5 million to support the Sarah and Chaim Neuberger Holocaust Education Center in Toronto. I had never heard of the Montreal Holocaust Museum. That would be a second one, right? Because there's one in Ottawa, a particularly ugly building. I have no objection to such things. However, I will point something out which cannot be denied. There's the National Holocaust Museum in Ottawa, and there's a Montreal Holocaust Museum. The Holocaust did not happen in Canada, and it did not happen to Canadians. There is no excuse for the government paying for and supporting these museums. If people want to support them, good for them. But this is not a Canadian subject, full stop. Let's go to the chat. Respectable commenting name says perhaps they could make sure there's a museum on every street corner rather than in every city. True Greenberg, hello, says once it was all roads lead to Rome, but now it's all questions leading to the Jewish question. Hello to Chokokin, six. There's also the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, which is in Winnipeg, and which I have dubbed the Scold in the Cold. It's another hideous building. Who is going to go to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights? Nobody is going to go. Oh my God, that is just a spectacularly ugly building. The Asper family. Izzy Asper, who founded CanWest Global Media, came up with this idea of Museum of Human Rights, and then the Liberal government and then the Conservative government under Stephen Harper effectively federalized it. And essentially what the Museum for Human Rights does is to tell how bad white people are. And it's drained hundreds of millions of dollars. This absolute nonsense. Again, back to the chat. Oscar Toe says there is another effect which takes place when people keep hammering an event in your head to never forget, and that is a mind instinctively begins blocking it out. Well, Jewish leaders have expressed considerable alarm in recent years that apparently young people don't know or particularly care about the Holocaust. Now, this might be considered bad news for Israel because the argument for Israel in the first place and for continued support for Israel was, the Holocaust happened. Well, as I say, it ended 77 years ago, and people, I think, are becoming increasingly irritated by this. It seems to me that it'd be sensible enough for Israel to simply say, we're here because we're here, because we're here. We fought for this land, we took it, and we're not going anywhere. I am not one of those sentimental liberals who sobs over the Palestinian cause. But it seemed to me that it's not just a question of diminishing returns, arguing the Holocaust for why Israel must be supported, monetarily and every other way. in perpetuity. Again, we're here because we're here because we're here. That's always a good argument. Who else do we have here? Syria Redux. We're investigating Russian use of chemical weapons, says Metal Mike. Well, as Peter Hitchens has bravely written, that this was all fake. These claims that Assad was gassing his population. Why would he do that? He was on the verge of winning the war, which, of course, he did. It was predicted some time ago that if the Ukraine starts making claims about, chemical weapons, this means that they're losing, that they're close to kaput. I said yesterday on Twitter, if universal falsehood could be monetized, the Ukraine would be the richest country on earth. Now, I suppose I don't have a dog in this fight, Russia versus Ukraine. I'm neither Russian nor Ukrainian. These countries are a long way away, and they really have little importance to Canada. Russia does not constitute a threat to Canada, but we are always forced to choose. Okay, if I'm going to be forced to choose, I choose Russia and Vladimir Putin, because there are many things you can say about Russia, but the Ukraine is the money laundering, surrogate baby racket, white slavery capital of the world. This is the worst Western country that exists by far. And of course, so much of this newfound love of the Ukraine is really a reflexive hatred of Russia, much of which derives from ethnic animus. There's no other explanation for it. Respectable commenting name says, I'm rooting for whatever resolution weakens and embarrasses the USG the most. Who else do we have here? Hello to Don Willis. And anyone else? I think I'll move on. I think I will move on and talk about Amy Wax, who is a Jewish woman, and I'm quite fond of her, actually. Born in 1953, this is from Wikipedia. She is Robert Mundheim Professor of Law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Her work addresses issues in social welfare law and policy, as well as the relationship of the family, the workplace, and labor markets. There were all these people on Twitter over the last few days saying, all of these people who are standing for Amy Wax, they're jealous of Jumanji Brown, whatever her name is. Really? Let's see. Wax attended and graduated from Yale University, a Bachelor of Science in Molecular Biophysics and Biochemistry, summa cum laude, 1975. She then attended Oxford University, where she was a Marshall Scholar in Philosophy, Physiology, and Psychology at Somerville College, 1976. She next attended both Harvard Med School, 1981, and Harvard Law School, first year, 1981. She practiced medicine from 1982 to 1987, doing a residency in neurology at New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center, as well as working as a consulting neurologist at a clinic in the Bronx and for a medical group in Brooklyn. She completed her legal education at Columbia Law School, a JD, 1987, editor of the Columbia Law Review, working part-time to put herself through law school. She then clerked for Judge Abner Mikva of the U.S. Court of Appeals, and she worked in the Office of the Solicitor General in the United States. She argued 15 cases before the United States Supreme Court, taught at the University of Virginia Law School from 1994 to 2000. Very impressive woman. There is no other way to describe it. I suppose what's most impressive about Amy Wax is that she says what she thinks, and there are very few people who do that now. And she's in big trouble at UPenn. What was she, 68, 69 years old? it's nice to see, this woman has a long, full career, and she's laid down the gauntlet. And I suppose UPenn will do to her whatever they can get away with. But it's not as if I don't think she has to, worry about the poorhouse if she loses her Ivy League job. This is from Jared Mitovich at the Daily Pennsylvanian, which is the newspaper of UPenn. Tenured Penn Law professor Amy Wax, who is currently under a faculty investigation for her, quote, increasing promotion of white supremacy, reignited controversy, claiming that Black Americans and non-Western groups are resentful towards Western people. In an April 8th interview with Tucker Carlson, Wax also criticized Indian immigrants to the United States for judging and expressing disapproval of the U.S. She claimed that she believes at some level their country is a shithole. Quote, I think there is just a tremendous amount of resentment and shame of non-Western peoples against Western peoples for Western people's outsized achievements and contributions. I mean, it's really unbearable. I was actually, leaving aside American blacks, who I do think feel that resentment and shame and envy. I mean, it's this unholy brew of sentiments, unquote. Penn Law Dean Ted Ruger and Penn Law spokesperson Meredith Rovine wrote to the Daily Pennsylvanian April 11th that they would withhold public comment on the controversy until the faculty review process of Wax has concluded in adherence to a university policy. Wax and Carlson also spoke about her December interview with Brown University professor Glenn Lurie, where she ignited a national online firestorm by claiming, quote, that the United States is better off with fewer Asians and less Asian immigration, unquote. 4 weeks after those racist remarks, which she doubled down on in January, Ruger announced a formal faculty investigation to determine whether Wax's public conduct has impacted her classroom teaching. Ruger wrote in a January 18th statement that Wax's conduct has led to multiple complaints from university community members since at least 2017, which have cited Wax's comments as a cumulative and increasing promotion of white supremacy. Wax reiterated, or repeated, as most people would write, to Carlson that Asian, South Asian, and Indian doctors at Penn Medicine are on the ramparts of what she claimed are anti-racism initiatives that denounce the United States as a racist country. Penn third year Apratim Vidyarthi, a lead student organizer of efforts to have the university hold Wax accountable, said that Wax and Carlson's recent remarks were really upsetting and contribute to a narrative that Black Americans and immigrants do not belong in the United States. No, there are very few people who are arguing that Black Americans do not belong in the United States. They have been in the United States for a long time, and they are just as American as anyone else. That is to say, those who are the descendants of slavery. Those who just got to the United States yesterday from Congo or Nigeria or whatever, well, not so much. In January, Vidyarthi and other Penn Law students started a petition that garnered over 2,500 signatures calling for Wax's suspension while the university investigates her and demanding the university take further steps to advance equity and inclusion. Reminder, again, equity does not mean equality. It means something quite different. Vidyarthi said there are a lot of students at Penn Law and at Penn who are immigrants, either first generation or the children of immigrants. It clearly seems that WAC doesn't think any of those people are deserving of full rights and privileges and liberties that this country has to offer. Yes, well, that raises the question, all of these great rights and privileges and liberties, why do they hate America so much? Why do all of these privileged Indians in my country, Pakistanis for that matter, why do they hate Canada so much? Why? Is it because they feel somewhat embarrassed? Could it be, I firmly believe that in terms of the women, one of the reasons that they hate Canada so much and they hate white women so much is that they are not found, for the most part, there are exceptions, to be sexually attractive. And they don't really try to hide it, actually. This is from a Newsweek story. Data from the U.S. Census Bureau in 2020 showed Asian Americans had a median household income of $94,900 compared to $74,900 among white people. Hispanic and Black Americans had lower median household incomes of $55,300 and $45,800, respectively. Wax said that people from an Asian background hate America, a goodly number of them, not all. Take Brahmin, high social class, that's high social class women. They climb the ladder, they get the best education, we give them every opportunity, and they turn around and lead the charge on, we're racist, we're an awful country, we need reform, our medical system needs reform. Well, here's the problem. They're taught that they are better than everybody else because they are Brahmin elites. And yet, on some level, their country is a shithole, excuse my language, is not providing them with the opportunities that they feel that they deserve, and which in many cases they do deserve. Oh, yes, Neil Makhija, a Penn Law lecturer and executive director of Indian American Impact, a South Asian civic organization, hit out at Wax over her comments. He tweeted, subsequently deleted, Amy Wax is a total disgrace and embarrassment. Today, Wax and Tucker Carlson said that Indians America hate America. News to you, we are America. And we're committed to dismantling the systems that give your racist, moronic ideas a platform to spread. Yes, we love America so much, says this Indian leader, that we intend to destroy it. It's our country now. Look at what's happened at Microsoft and Seattle generally. It's all caste system all the time. With the high caste Indians, no, you low caste Indians aren't going to get any jobs at Microsoft. And of course, Indian racial politics is now increasingly dominating the city of Seattle and its suburbs, and determining the representatives that are sent to Congress. It would be difficult to think of a group, possibly the Han Chinese, who are more obsessed with race than Hindus. And for them to accuse Americans or Canadians of so-called racism is not just richly amusing, it is infuriating. And I rather blame us. We should have never let these people in the first place, but it should have been made clear to them that, how about you shut up, okay? You don't know anything about our country. You didn't grow up here. And if you don't grow up in a country, it's difficult to really know it. So stop telling us what to do. Also, stop telling us how bad we are, because if we're that bad, why did you come here? You can still go home. I'm sure, India would have plenty of use for such an outstanding person as you. Most of the staff, you could say that of most of the staff of the Toronto Star, in fact. So Steve Saylor had an interesting essay on the Wax controversy, and he writes about the rage of the disesteemed. And he quotes from a famous essay by James Baldwin, or as the Kennedy brothers used to call him, Martin Luther Queer. This is from Notes of a Native Son, 1955. From all available evidence, no black man had ever set foot in this tiny Swiss village before I came. If I sat in the sun for more than 5 minutes, some daring creature was certain to come along and gingerly put his fingers on my hair as though he were afraid of an electric shock. No, I'm sorry, I don't believe him. Black people have been rich black people coming to Switzerland, to put their money in secret Swiss bank accounts for a long time, to spend their money in the shops of Geneva and Zurich and such like. So no, there are a lot of rich people from everywhere in the world in Switzerland. So no, I don't believe James Baldwin. But he continues. I thought of white men arriving for the first time in an African village, strangers there, as I am a stranger here, and tried to imagine the astounded populace touching their hair and marveling at the color of their skin. But there's a great difference between being the first white man to be seen by Africans and being the first black man to be seen by whites. The white man takes the astonishment as tribute, for he arrives to conquer and to convert the natives, whose inferiority in relation to himself is not even to be questioned, whereas I, without a thought of conquest, find myself among a people whose culture controls me, has even in a sense created me, people who have cost me more in anguish and rage that they will ever know, who yet do not even know of my existence. Switzerland, not a colonial power. Switzerland, famously neutral for hundreds and hundreds of years. Again, could have, if he chose to live in Paris, eventually, James Baldwin, he could have spoken the French in this way because the French had a great world empire. But Switzerland? Nah, no. For this village, even if it were incomparably more remote and incredibly more primitive, is the West onto which I have been so strangely grafted. These people cannot be, from the point of view of power, strangers anywhere in the world. They have made the modern world, in effect, even if they do not know it. The most illiterate among them is related, in a way that I am not, to Dante, Shakespeare, Michelangelo, Aeschylus, Da Vinci, Rembrandt, and Racine. The cathedral at Chartres says something to them which it cannot say to me. I can't imagine why not, as indeed would New York's Empire State Building, should anyone here ever see it. Out of their hymns and dances come Beethoven, Bach, go back a few centuries, and they are in their full glory. But I am in Africa watching the conquerors arrive. 1960, a few years after this essay was published, about 10% of American blacks were Roman Catholic. That number has cratered, I would say, for two reasons. One being the chaos that followed the Second Vatican Council. Secondly, the belief, which is almost universal amongst Black Americans, that there is a black religion for them and a white religion for white people. But I think this is dated, all right? This is very much dated. So he gives us a list of worthies: Dante, Shakespeare, Michelangelo, Aeschylus, etc. All right, and he mentions Chartres and the Empire State Building. We have been told, and this is the drumbeat has become thunderous, that yes, so what? They're colonialists. Oh, that some of them benefited by the economic system of their time. That is true of all people in all times. All right, so what? The next argument was a little different, that MC Lil Scissorp is just as valuable, if not more, than Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. And it should be MC Lil Scissorp that is taught in music school, and not Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, because the only reason that anyone cares about Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms is because they were white people and we lived in a white supremacist culture. Well, we still do. That doesn't explain how the enemies of white culture, or European culture, if you will, become ever more powerful. I've spoken on this show several times of the wholesale destruction that is going on in orchestras in the United States, in music schools in the United States. To give one example, blind auditions. They're not hiring Black classical musicians because they go on the stage, to play the violin or whatever. Oh, that fellow's Black, we're not going to hire him. So they demanded blind auditions. Now they're saying blind auditions are racist. Oh, and so the white fellow who got chosen as one of the second violins was 15% better, say, assuming this could be quantified, than the Black applicant. Well, 85% is high enough. Well, no, it isn't, actually, not if you're seeking excellence. But no, the opera and the symphony orchestras, they must be destroyed. And the music schools must be destroyed as well, because why are they not, here's a list of 12 Black classical composers that no one has ever heard of. They're just as good as the 3 Bs. And also, again, why isn't MC Lil Scissorp being taught at Juilliard? And so I think the world has moved on from what Steve Saylor describes here. It's difficult for people to be resentful of something, a culture that they believe to be worthless. And this isn't just the arts as well. Oh, who is the actor? A well-known Black actor? I wish I could remember his name. Terence something or other, who actually, he claims to have invented math, that there's no such thing as zero. Okay, something like that. And who says that 2 plus 2 equals 4? That, empiricism is racist. Rules are racist. Teaching, well, teaching of the kind of, you sit down, shut up, sit still, I'll write things on the blackboard, or I will read to you, that's racist, because that's not the way that Black people learn. Well, if it's true, that's not the way that Black people learn, then obviously there would have to be a return to segregated schools. Of course, the other possibility is that the education for white people and Asians could be completely destroyed, because we want to encourage everyone to contribute. Sure, get up on your desk and dance and shout, and maybe you'll learn something of that way. I happen to think that this argument is contemptuous of Black people, but that's what their leaders are telling us. And let's go back to the chat here. Okay, here we go. And okay. Cracker Jill. Don Willis mentions Cracker Jill. Okay, it was Terrence Howard. Thank you, No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA. Do you remember when you used to hear about how very smart Will Smith is? Apparently, math was mentioned there. I saw an interview with him. Wow, it could have been around the time of Independence Day. I think it was on the cover of Vanity Fair, and I read the interview, and he said some very interesting things to say. How about that theory that AIDS was invented at Fort Meade, Maryland, deliberately to wipe out Black people from the United States? Will Smith said that was interesting. There were other, famous conspiracy theories mentioned, which are believed by a great many Black people. I think the first one I mentioned is believed by something like 40 to 45% of Black people, or they say they do. And Will Smith said these other, I don't know, the one, what was it, KFC or Church's Fried Chicken makes Black men sterile. He said these were interesting. Doesn't sound like much of an empiricist. Don Willis says to find a form that accommodates the mess, that is the task of the artist now. I read all of Samuel Beckett when I was a young man. I was very much interested in the avant-garde. I like Samuel Beckett's early short stories quite well. And then his writing got sparer and sparer. And of course, he started writing in French and then translating back into English, which is going to make a difference. And it got so spare that, in the fullness of its career, you would, read his books, his novels, or whatever, or watch his plays. And what? Huh? Oh, am I supposed to, glean something from the silences here? The gaps. Scientology rotted his soul, says Yo Mama. Anaconda malt liquor gives you Little Richard, says Yo Mama. Who else do we have here? Lachrymose, rebarbative, says Choco 666. Yes, I'm very fond of both of those words. Yo Mama says if you hate colonialism, you hate America, Brazil, Canada, Australia. How come the Spanish never get dragged into this, huh? The Spanish had, at one point, the biggest empire in the world. But somehow you don't have all these people railing against the Spanish in the same way that the British and French are railed against. Yeah, it's curious. The Portuguese had an enormous empire. They had Brazil. It's half of South America. Again, I reviewed a book about this, Portuguese colonialists circa 1500. Just amazing, amazing people. That this idea that this tiny country at the very edge of Europe, on the Atlantic Ocean, could set out and, conquer thousands of miles away. Just remarkable, inspiring too, I'd have to say. Gamion, hello. Saw a girl in a shirt that said emotionally exhausted on it, immediately read it to myself in KMG's voice, made me feel close to KMG in chat. Aw, thank you. Hello to Telio Logic Jones. Shouldn't it be Martin Luther Queen? Yeah, I believe I made that joke earlier. I think we'll forget the sun in its jealous sky is a rather careless line. It turns the warm field of gold cold in cloudy, it casts a shadow. Hating your country and its people is an elite cosmopolitan signifier. It's aspirational, says Halper. Indeed it is, but that's, redolent of a sick society. Dan says, I appreciate Mrs. Wax's candor, as do I. Who are we talking about her? I discovered her like not that long ago. Who is that? Oh, Amy Wax, I suppose. Oh, yeah. I get it. I get it. And Britain was colonized by the Romans. Well, half of it, yes. Half of it. Because Spain was colonized by the Arabs. Yes, it took 700 years, but they eventually expelled them in 1492, the same year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Of course, I think that Ferdinand and Isabella are not in good odor in contemporary Spain. They're only the saviors of the country, but who cares about that sort of thing? Personally, I prefer and miss KMG's use of the word scabrous. It says, respectable commenting name. And let us go to, let's see whether this is going to come up. Back to Tainter, Collapse of Complex Societies. Chapter 4, Understanding Collapse, the Marginal Productivity of Socio-Political Change. It begins with a quotation from Walt Whitman. It is provided in the essence of things that from any fruition of success, no matter what, shall come forth something to make a greater struggle necessary. Hang on, I'm going to close the door. It's getting a little chilly here. It has been from 5 to 10 degrees lower than seasonally normal here in Victoria for many weeks now. It's becoming exceedingly tiresome. This radically below average temperature has been coupled with exceedingly high winds. But back to Tainter. Human societies and political organizations, like all living systems, are maintained by a continuous flow of energy. Energy is the key to Tainter's own theory of why complex systems collapse. From the simplest familial unit to the most complex regional hierarchy, the institutions and patterned interactions that comprise a human society are dependent on energy. At the same time, the mechanisms by which human groups acquire and distribute basic resources are conditioned by and integrated within socio-political institutions. Energy flow and socio-political organization are opposite sides of an equation. Neither can exist in a human group without the other, nor can either undergo substantial change without altering both the opposite member and the balance of the equation. Energy flow and socio-political organization must evolve in harmony. Not only is energy flow required to maintain a socio-political system, but the amount of energy must be sufficient for the complexity of that system. Leslie White observed a number of years ago that cultural evolution was intricately linked to the quantities of energy harvested by a human population. The amounts of energy required per capita to maintain the simplest human institutions are incredibly small compared with those needed by the most complex. White once estimated that a cultural system activated primarily by human energy could generate only about 1/20th of a horsepower per capita per year. This contrasts sharply with the hundreds to thousands of horsepower at the command of the members of industrial societies. Cultural complexity varies accordingly. Julian Stewart pointed out the quantitative difference between the 3,000 to 6,000 cultural elements early anthropologists documented for native populations of Western North America and the more than 500,000 artifact types that U.S. military forces landed at Casablanca in World War II. More complex societies are more costly to maintain than simpler ones, requiring greater support levels per capita. As societies increase in complexity, more networks are created among individuals, more hierarchical controls are created to regulate these networks, more information is processed, there is more centralization of information flow, there is increasing need to support specialists not directly involved in resource production, and the like. All of this complexity is dependent upon energy flow at a scale vastly greater than that characterizing small groups of self sufficient foragers or agriculturalists. The result is that as a society evolves toward greater complexity, the support costs levied on each individual will also rise, so that the population as a whole must allocate increasing portions of its energy budget to maintaining organizational institutions. This is an immutable fact of societal evolution and is not mitigated by type of energy source. Whether one endorses a conflict or an integration model of society, or some synthesis of these, it is necessary to inquire into the benefits that a population derives from its investment in complexity. Although in the previous chapter, serious questions were raised about the view that complex societies collapse as a result of overtaxing their populations, nevertheless, the question of benefits relative to investment merits a close look. This is so under either a conflict model, in which complexity is seen as a response to class competition and the needs of an elite to maintain privilege, or an integration model, in which complexity is viewed as a response to social needs. In either view, complexity is a solution to perceived problems, and its facility in resolving these problems is based in part on its ratio of benefits to investment. Where this ratio is unfavorable, complexity is not a very successful strategy. As with energy and organization, the benefits and cost of investment in complexity are opposite poles of an equation. Neither can be considered without the other, although regrettably they usually are. It is the thesis of this chapter, Tainter writes, that return on investment in complexity varies, and that this variation follows a characteristic curve. More specifically, it is proposed that in many crucial spheres, continued investment in socio-political complexity reaches a point where the benefits for such investment begin to decline, at first gradually, then with accelerated force. Thus, not only must a population allocate greater and greater amounts of resources to maintaining an evolving society, but after a certain point, higher amounts of this investment will yield smaller increments of return. Diminishing returns, it will be shown, are a recurrent aspect of socio-political evolution and of investment in complexity. The principle of diminishing returns is one of the few phenomena of such regularity and predictability that economists are willing to call it a law. In manufacturing, diminishing returns set in when investment in the form of additional inputs causes a decline in the rate of productivity. While this is not exactly analogous to the processes that cause diminishing returns in socio-political evolution, some of the terminology developed by economists will nevertheless be helpful in the discussion that follows. Two concepts commonly used by economists are useful here. These are average product and marginal product. The average product of an economic activity is simply the output per unit of input. The marginal product of any input is the increase in the total output resulting from the input. Similarly, the average cost is the cost per unit of input, while the marginal cost is the increase or decrease in total cost resulting from one more or less unit of output. The law of diminishing returns refers to changes in average and marginal products and costs. Average product and average cost respond to and ultimately follow changes in marginal product and cost. Both are subject to this principle, which is also called the law of diminishing marginal productivity. The relationship between marginal and average product is shown in the figure in this book. For present purposes, one term will be emphasized. The discussion will most often refer to the concept marginal return. This may be taken to mean the same thing as marginal product, that is, return per increased unit of investment. The word return is preferred to product to emphasize the concern with whatever benefits a population obtains from its investment in complexity. The proposition introduced above may now be rephrased in the terminology that will be used throughout the remainder of this work. It is suggested that the increased costs of socio-political evolution frequently reach a point of diminishing marginal returns. That is to say, that the benefit to investment ratio of socio-political complexity follows the marginal product curve of Figure 1. After a certain point, increased investments in complexity fail to yield proportionally increasing returns. Marginal returns decline and marginal costs rise. Complexity as a strategy becomes increasingly costly and yields decreasing marginal benefits. 4 concepts discussed to this point can lead to an understanding of why complex societies collapse. These concepts are: 1, human societies are problem-solving organizations. 2, social political systems require energy for their maintenance. 3, increased complexity carries with it increased costs per capita. And 4, investment in socio-political complexity as a problem-solving response often reaches a point of declining marginal returns. The remainder of this chapter will be devoted to showing how these factors are related to collapse. First, the proposition that investment in complexity breeds diminishing returns will be examined in some detail, for this proposition is crucial for explaining collapse. Next, the reasons for such declining marginal productivity will be examined. And finally, a synthetic explanation of collapse will be developed from these concepts. And I'll have more from Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. And do I want to talk about COVID-19? Let's take a look at the Daily Skeptic, see if anything jumps out from there. Oh, do you know we're in the middle of the 6th wave? And again, when I'm on the streets, it would appear to me that about 20% of people where I live, at least those who are willing to go outside, have been broken by the COVID-19 hysteria. Wearing masks, outdoors, even when alone, even in a city as windy as Victoria. Why are they doing so? Well, as my friend Teleologic Jones says, and why are these young white people doing this? To give the middle finger to the truckers. Yeah, you didn't win. We're going to wear masks every day, even outside, even when we're alone, till we die. Because if we don't, the truckers win. The COVID doomsters are coming out for Easter. The NHS Confederation is calling for the return of compulsory mask wearing and new restrictions on mixing indoors. Roll up, my friends, for the pandemic that never ends, writes Richard Littlejohn in the Mail. Philadelphia moved towards a perma-COVID regime. This week, Philadelphia announced it would be reinstating its indoor mask mandate amid a moderate rise in coronavirus cases, making it the first American city to do so. A warning from Shanghai. A new California bill threatens to strip doctors of their medical licenses for saying things the state doesn't like. We don't have to imagine what that would look like, writes Professor Jay Bhattacharya on Common Sense. China is cracking under the weight of zero COVID. If Xi's rivals sense they could use public dissent to undermine his grip on power, the ingredients for crisis would fall into place, says Mark Almond in the Telegraph. Yet another paper fails to find that masks do anything. Study shows inhalation of microplastics found in masks getting into lung tissue for the first time. And any bigger stories? Oh, Toby Young on GB News said there's a reason for keeping Boris Johnson in office. The drumbeat for another lockdown is becoming quite deafening. Someone like Jeremy Hunt or Michael Gove would have us all locked down again tomorrow. Whether the British people, well, the English people, would actually put up with that, I'm not so sure. Would they put up with it again? They put up with it for the first time. I think that an attempt to reintroduce masks, lockdown, social distancing, and all the rest of it would probably lead to widespread civil disorder in England. Sri Lanka defaults on debt, blaming COVID as financial crisis deepens. Boris Johnson, Kerry Johnson, and Rishi Sunak fined over Partygate. Will they go? More interesting question is Rishi Sunak, who was married to a very, very rich woman from India, and it transpired last week she wasn't paying British income tax because she was classified as a non-domicile. That is to say, not living in Britain. Oh, it's funny. I see all these pictures of her and her husband together. And then it turned out that another Indian cabinet minister in Boris Johnson's government was also non-domiciled for many years. Oh, Rishi Sunak kept his American green card while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer for 18 months. Rootless cosmopolite. The worrying signals hidden in the UK HSA data on vaccination during pregnancy. What we are, many more bad things are going to be known about the mRNA technology. William Briggs has a piece on his excellent blog, wmbriggs.com. He is, of course, the statistician to the stars, and he has a fine new book called Everything You Believe Is Wrong. He writes, if we had to pick one image to sum up China's Corona doom policy, most people are unsympathetic to the effects of China's ridiculous zero COVID policy on the general population. But what about the cats? Yes, all dogs and cats have been killed or are being killed in Shanghai. In a way, that's quite worrying because typically the absence of pets indicates dire conditions throughout the world. Shanghai is locked down. People aren't allowed outside their government-designed domiciles, except for small numbers of building representatives who venture out to gather food, which is running low, precious low. Meat is near non-existent. Maybe that's what those are for. People are opening their windows and screaming their woes into the black of night. Drones caution people not to sing. Men in spacesuits wander the streets spraying mysterious substances into the air, they say. But what's really going on in China? That expertocracy par excellence. Are these horrifying videos more sweet propaganda? Or maybe they are real and China has gone quite mad? Or is this just inscrutable Chinese behavior? Is Xi taking some kind of hidden revenge on Shanghai? We all saw the propaganda videos at the beginning of the man-made Corona doom panic, which were obvious BS. It is natural to suppose we're seeing the same thing again, government-directed propaganda to get the world to repanic, just as it is inclined to calm down. After all, China rigorously controls its internet, so the pictures and videos it allows out might be managed. Yet this doesn't have that feel, and as good as China's control is, it is not total. Briggs writes, too many videos are coming out. Here's a long thread of them. Of course, the Chinese might be purposely allowing these leaks for the same propaganda purposes, leveraging midwit dupes in Western media. Even so, that doesn't seem to be true. It's more likely that this is the natural end result of expert-designed zero COVID policy, a policy that, once embraced and held for so long, cannot be abandoned without admitting a mistake, and that cannot happen. China is a one-party dictatorship, a complete expertocracy, a fully managed state. Once government makes a decision, it is not wrong by definition. It can admit to being suboptimal, we can do better, or to being foiled by exterior enemies. This is big GAE's fault. But it cannot admit to being wrong in something as monumental as a 2.5-year hysterical guided panic meant to eliminate, for the first time in human history, a communicable respiratory disease. It is also true that the Chinese as a people embrace hypochondria, so it is not surprising the overreaction originated there. Longtime readers will recall that none of us was sure of China's corona numbers at the beginning of the panic. Many on Team Reality were sure China was lying about those numbers, broadcasting fake low ones. I was in the opposite camp, suspecting China's numbers were real, at least for the reason that they obviously wanted to juice a panic, those dropping dead in the streets video, so why go low? But their numbers and ours weren't the same. Definitions count. China seemed from the beginning to be using the old-fashioned and medically sound definition of case, a patient ill enough to require treatment, i.e. more severe than a mere infection, whereas idiot policy in the USA et al., especially after the propagandists got hold of the numbers, was to classify even asymptomatic suspected infections as cases that made things appear worse than they were. That's finally changing here. Sanity is being restored, perhaps because the disease is no longer politically helpful and cases are becoming cases again. Below is a graph of China's numbers, February 2020, a blip. And then pretty much down to the bottom, oh, and then at February is straight up like that. This is from the National Health Commission of the People's Republic of China. The question is whether these are still real cases or has China finally decided to join the foolish definition club, and if so, why? China has long had a much more extensive testing regime than other countries, it being mandatory and regular. Even small infection clusters will show up. So since we don't see these, it's likely the main time portion of the plot were real cases. Mass testing was always asinine, prolonging and sustaining the panic. It cannot be that China went without infections that long. Now, there is reason to suspect China switched to the Western idiot definition and now count any positive test as a case. That's what they did in Hong Kong, a move which nicely diffused the growing democracy protest movement. Remember that? Hard to protest while locked down. Then, given the obvious benefits of that strategy in Hong Kong, perhaps it was judged good to do it in Shanghai. The other evidence is that reports are leaking out that the current rise in the chart is asymptomatic cases. In the old days in medicine, 2019, a surge in asymptomatic infections would be greeted with great joy because a disease that is mutated to a harmless form was seen as a good thing. Infections that caused no harm and conferred immunity. Let her rip. Also, allowing harmlessness to spread would admit the zero COVID policy was wrong. Actually, that was a last, not also. So China's recent behavior is either the intense hubris only found in experts, or China has some political reason for controlling Shanghai. It could also be to provide theatrics for us, so that we believe something terrible is happening, but I doubt it. William Briggs concludes. I don't know, for what, 5 years or so? 5, 6 years, I wrote about the mining industry. And so there's a lot about China there. Because the cost of many metals and cost of iron ore is largely dependent on the state of the Chinese economy. And I learned one big thing. People know almost nothing about China, and it's impossible to find out. It is not in the nature of a communist regimes like China's to allow true figures to be released, because true figures are often embarrassing. So everything that we hear about China is just a guess. Oh, yes, their economy is growing 10% year over year over year. Oh, they can keep that up for how long? How long? I guess if they have to build ghost cities, sufficient for 1 million people, and just leave them there to rot. Wow, that's Keynesianism on steroids. But the Chinese are strange in that regard. Inflation. Yeah, I wanted to talk about inflation. Where's my story about inflation? Now, let me find this here. There was a Canadian budget last week, and of course, we get one response to it. Oh, the government. The government has come out with things, and so that is good. The government is made up of good, moral, decent, hard-working people doing their best for us. So it would be wrong. It would be deeply, deeply wrong for people to disagree with Chrystia Freeland's budget. Very, very bad. Particularly, what with the anguish that she is suffering personally because of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. There was a piece by someone called Jim Stanford that appeared on Global News, and it is essentially a lightly rewritten Chrystia Freeland press release. That here's the problem. Shortly, in short, government inputs count as part of GDP. Oh, the GDP is growing, and if the GDP is growing, then all's well with the world or any particular country. Well, there's a problem with that, because the government can boost the GDP by borrowing stupendous amounts of money to go into debt, because government inputs count. It could go on a hiring spree of parasitical civil servants, or NGO spivs, and this boosts the GDP, which leads to the fallacy of people like Jim Stanford, who is an economist and director at the Center for Future Work in Vancouver, which is an NGO which seems to be associated with the Council for Policy Alternatives, something like that, which is associated with Canada's labor movement. But I find, and this is very irritating, Okay, so we have some NGO. What is the source of your funding? There's going to be a link on your webpage to your latest, financial report, accounting report. Increasingly, there isn't. Perhaps because they have noticed that then people would realize that almost all of these NGOs are astroturfed by governments. So the argument that he makes in this essay, Jim Stanford, is deficit schmaffershit. Deficits are good. Yes, deficits are great. Deficits are the best because they deliver goods and services to people, outstanding jobs, whatever. Okay. Yeah. Of course, this money that governments borrow, there's assumption there that it's going to be paid back. Of course, that's not true. It's not going to be paid back. We're going to see many more defaults like Sri Lanka's. Of course, there are two alternatives here. How to deal with unsustainable debt? Well, there's a repudiation, which is very dangerous. Or alternatively, there's inflation. And the experts have chosen door number two. But how's inflation working in Canada? And we have this absolutely incredible assertion, or this economist, is relying on an assertion made by the Bank of Canada. Oh, yeah, telling you the tremendous growth in Canada. Oh, the unemployment rate hit a new 50-year low of 5.3% in March, as does the United States. The people who've given up looking for work in Canada do not count as unemployed. So our unemployment numbers are useless. Clearly, our inflation numbers are useless. Here's a data point. Last night, I went to Burger King to buy my supper, and I got what I always get, which is the 2 sandwiches and soft drink meal for $5. And then I was told to pay $6.40 something cents. Previously, it had been $5.25, the $5 for the meal and 25% in taxes. So I asked about the price. Yes, it had just gone up by $1, which is an increase of 20%. What, 6 months ago or so, sandwiches, these pre-made sandwiches that I buy at Save On Food, they'd gone up from what, $5.99 to $6.99. You see this across the board. But this is what this economist has to say. This rapid growth reflects a combination of recovery for the pandemic, strong job creation. What kind of jobs? Useful jobs or parasitic jobs? Rising world prices for our resource experts and inflation. Indeed, for the first time in 30 years, growth is so strong that the Bank of Canada is now struggling to keep inflation within its target range of 1 to 3%. Yeah, I had something to say about that. What I had to say was, hang on a second here. Oh, yes, balanced budgets don't matter, he says. I'm going to have to check this again. Sorry about that. There we go. It's going to come up now. Yes, I tweeted to him, aside from the fact that your essay resembles a barely rewritten Chrystia Freeland press release, do you really believe that inflation is running at 1 to 3%? Been to a grocery store lately, a restaurant, bought gas, rented or bought a dwelling? Yes. I continued, given that government inputs are included in GDP, this promotes the hiring of many more thousands of parasitical employees, civil servants, and NGO spivs, and encourages the calamitous belief that countries can borrow themselves strong economically. The chickens are coming home to roost. You know, it would be one thing if this money was being borrowed, or things that actually increased economic capacity. They're not. There's absolutely not. Canada is always investing much money in the Ukraine. In fact, lending money to the Ukraine, which of course it will never get back. Why don't they just admit, it's not a loan? But no, green energy. Once again, there is no proof that green energy can be scaled. And even if it could be scaled, this would require the existence of parallel economic systems. One, the old-fashioned petroleum-based system, and two, the newfangled green, which is scaling up. Again, assuming it can be scaled. You need both these systems. Otherwise, we would freeze to death in the dark. But the genius economists never mention that part. And the media has decided that Chrystia Freeland's budget is an absolute triumph. It's, just outstanding triumph. And woe betide anyone who says different, not that anyone is saying any different. We have a similar story in the United States. I should mention, of course, that the Consumer Price Index and the Canadian equivalent they're bogus. They use something called a basket. And when things get too expensive, they take it out of the basket. Neat system, huh? They also use something called hedonics. I've mentioned this example before. It's a well-known example. If you've ever been to school, university, or you've had children who go to university and maybe you have to pay for their textbooks, this book cost how much? About $100, $150, $200? How could a book cost that much? Well, it's actually not more expensive. I don't know, let's say a physics textbook would have been 20, 30 years ago. What are you talking about? It's got color pictures in it. So, well, the color pictures mean that the book is so much more valuable than it was previously when it only had black and white pictures or black and white, graphs and charts. Yes, that is economic orthodoxy now. Alex Berenson writes on his Substack, Unreported Truths, Jen Psaki, July 2021, inflation will be 2.2% in 2022. Actual year-over-year inflation, 8.5% and rising. We're seeing prices go back to pre-pandemic levels. LOL. True story. The only thing rising faster than prices is the number of congressional seats the Republicans are projected to pick up in November. That was then. Not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki had said, we take inflation very seriously. It is under the purview of the Federal Reserve. As you know, they have regular quarterly meeting where they put out that information and any considerations publicly. Yes, 2.2. They have not changed that, and that is aligned with a number of outside economists as well. You're also correct that when an economy is turning back from a global pandemic, there isn't a lot of historic precedent for that. And then the latest numbers. March inflation report shows 8.5% price increase since last year. And again, since the consumer price index is bogus, when the U.S. government says 8.5%, we're looking at more like about 20%. Berenson concludes, how can anyone not look at the last 2 years and not conclude our elites are morons? What's worse is that they don't know it. And by the way, the stock market is even better at making fools of predictors than SARS-CoV-2. But this feels like a Wile E. Coyote over the cliff moment, if ever there was one. And then we found out today that the U.S. federal government is playing a fast one with regard to housing prices, that they use a little trick, which essentially cuts the actual rise in housing prices in half. Because, they can do that because they have the authority. Look at the chat. Hello to Paula Oppenheimer. To achieve a world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. That's from Brock Adams. Build back better, they say. Destroying the middle class is their idea of building back better, because people in the middle class, they got a little too big for their boots. Not so keen on, globalization. And they need to be taught a lesson. Palpicasso 88 says, how many people are dumb enough to think inflation is Putin's fault? How many people are dumb enough to wear a mask outdoors when alone, when the wind is blowing at 30 miles per hour? Well, judging by what I saw on the streets today, about 20% are dumb enough to do that. Hello to Halper. I saw Cali gas prices at $10 a gallon, I think it was, says David the Gnome. Palpicasso 88 says, I remember right after 9/11, I was standing in line behind an old woman at a 7-Eleven, and she was yelling at a clerk because gas was 80 cents a liter. David the Gnome says, how much fuel does a morbidly obese person can campaign. Again, from Oppenheimer, China's Four Pests campaign, 1958 to 62, eliminated rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. The extermination of sparrows resulted in an ecological imbalance, prompting Mao to redirect the focus to bedbugs. Dan says, Freeland's best work to date. You know the old joke about Rolling Stones reviews, that every time David Bowie came up with a new record, his best work since Scary Monsters, or whenever Bruce Springsteen would come out with a new album, his best work since Nebraska. How many albums ago was that? You know, Prince would come up with a new album, Prince's best work since Around the World in a Day, which came out, if memory serves, in 1985. They're still saying this, in the 2000s, you know. Hello to Contra-Coup, who says the Shanghai lockdown could be simply intended to punish particular members of the CCP inner party. It doesn't necessarily have to be based on evidence or aimed at the West. There's no way to know. Indeed. And it's now clear that Tiananmen Square, much more complicated than, you know, what was told to us. There was a huge struggle going on within the party, particularly with regards to Peking. These people would not have been allowed on the streets at all if, you know, there was a crackdown, hardliners were in charge. So I think that the softliners, if you will, decided to push this as far as they could, and there was reaction, which led to the fellow, being run over by the tank, and the dissidents being cleared out and sent to gulags and shot. Okay. Hello, Joseph Camp. Kevin, white people control most institutions of power, so why would they be against themselves and their own interest? Please answer this. Satan? That's not a joke, by the way. Over-sophistication is another reason. To be in favor of, to be patriotic. Well, dummies do that. So I'm not one of the dummies. I'm going to take the opposite stance. I'm going to embrace oikophobia, as Roger Scruton called it. Picasso 88 says almost every food item I buy has gone up at least 20% in the last year or two. Hello to Thomas White. It's double plus ungood to doubt government, triple plus good, all virtue, says Teleologic Jones. Hello to John Vance. The GDP is obviously inflated as well. They account for jobs gained back that were lost during the lockdown. Well, yes. You see, one of the reasons for the CPI being so corrupt, to use the American example, is that if true CPI were reported, it would mean that there is no increase in the GDP at all, because inflation is deducted from GDP. Quattrolango, hello, says, by contrast, I've heard Russian econ stats are quite good to interconnected point of sale system. Gloria Miller, hello, says, warning label on a box of surgical mask. This product is an ear loop mask. This product is not a respirator and will not provide protection against COVID-19 and other viruses or contaminants. Yo Mama says, KMG, did you hear about the football player who died trying to cross the freeway on foot? The story was strangely reported. It just sounded like a normal, pedestrian accident. And then when I found out that this fellow, and I saw pictures of where the interstate, what are we looking at, 16 lanes or something? And the question, why would he do this? High as a kite. Obviously high as a kite. I once crossed an interstate on foot. Okay. Both going north, going south. This was Interstate 5. I won't tell you the story. It's a long, long story. It's kind of funny if I'm in the mood for it to be funny, and it's also kind of horrifying if I'm not. But ended up crossing, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, just outside Everett, Washington, which is north of Seattle. And it was a necessity to cross the interstate because the car was on the other side of it. The car had suffered a tire puncture. And as I say, it's a long, involved story. But I have crossed the interstate. But again, it was 3 o'clock in the morning and there was practically no traffic. This moron. He did it, what, 6 or 7 in the morning? Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Gloria Miller says, due to the difference in sizes between SARS-CoV-2 diameter and face masks thread diameter, the virus is 1,000 times smaller. SARS-CoV-2 can easily pass through any face mask, says Dr. Baruch Wein-Schaboim. Yeah. Gloria Miller says, communism doesn't work because people like to own stuff. I was reading about Frank Zappa, over the last couple of days. I don't know why I do this, because I can't really stand him. Reading, descriptions of his thousands, or just hundreds of albums, and stuff like Joe's Garage, and he really hated normal Americans, like religious people. He really hated them. And as he grew older, his embrace of sexual perversion, paraphilia, it got tighter and tighter and tighter. And his belief that I'm the smartest person in the world and I'm going to tell you about it. Oh, yes. And I'm a serious musician, in the tradition of Edgar Varese or Zanicki or Pierre Boulez. But let's talk about, don't eating the yellow snow. And let's talk about excrement, and just an appalling mixture there. True Greenberg says Red Ice answered the InfoWars slogan. The answer to 1984 is 1776 with their own slogan. The answer to 1984 is 1492. Okay. And I don't think I can avoid this. Oh yeah, let's talk about cheering on atrocities. Let's talk about cheering on atrocities against Russians, who we know begin their day by drinking copious amounts of baby's blood. And this is from Clint Ehrlich, who is a foreign policy analyst and a lawyer. And he appears on Tucker Carlson's show fairly often these days. He wrote on April the 6th, Western experts are openly cheering on Ukrainian war crimes. It's disgusting, just like celebrating war crimes by Russia would be. We need to publicly shame these people for acting like soulless monsters. One of the worst offenders is an adjunct fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. That's Neocon Central, Lyman Stone. He purports to be a Christian, but he can't hide his glee over Ukrainian atrocities. I'm not exaggerating. The man admits these are war crimes and still cheers them on. Here, Lyman is celebrating a massacre of POWs by the Ukrainian military. Obviously a war crime, but also not exactly shedding huge tears over it, he writes. This is a man who purports to be a Christian, but he's gloating over a video of POWs being shot to death. Here's his attempt to rationalize what he gets off on the video. He claims the POWs deserve to be murdered because they raped children and burned their corpses. There is zero evidence to support that claim beyond the loose geography of where the massacre was performed. Oh, yes, and his response to the war crime was tisk, tisk, Ukraine, tisk, tisk. Literally, that's what he wrote. I'm not picking on some random Twitter anon, writes Clint Ehrlich. This is a scholar at one of the West's most prestigious think tanks, AEI, and with 24K followers. He's celebrating war crimes because he knows it's safe to do it publicly, that it will enhance his reputation in America, not harm it. This is how twisted our foreign policy establishment has become. War crimes are acceptable, even laudable, as long as they're being performed by the correct side. And if you notice, if you still have a conscience, you're a traitor. I'm sorry, I can't play that game. I can't celebrate the murder of POWs, no matter their nationality. When atrocities are committed against Ukrainians, it's a tragedy. And when they're committed by Ukrainians, it's also horrific. How you react to a video of war crime shouldn't depend on the color of the victim's armbands. If you need to see that before knowing whether to cheer or cry, then you've lost your moral compass. You're no better than the monsters you claim to condemn. Update. I thought this thread might make him, that's Lyman Stone, do some soul searching. I was wrong. It's disturbing to see what people will stand behind. Lyman's defense, Clint Ehrlich writes, Yes, I was an adjunct fellow at AEI. Yes, I celebrated war crimes to my 20K followers, but it's okay because I'm just a silly demographer, not an expert on foreign policy. Whatever helps you sleep at night, dude. Yes, he actually justified this. I was wondering about this. What's the reason for this? Now, oh yes, we care very much about the Ukraine. No, we don't. It's a little different in Canada because a fairly significant portion of the population derives from immigrants who came to Canada from Galicia, a province of the Austrian Empire, more than 100 years ago. After the revolution, of course, they were completely cut off from the Ukraine, whatever its boundaries were at the time, constantly shifting. But yes, they pretend to care about this. Americans, there's not so many Ukrainians in the United States. The hatred of Russians, though, and the Russians in this dispute, in this invasion, they serve as a proxy for white people. See, when people like Lyman Stone take sadistic glee in the torture and murder of Russians, they're proxies for white people. This is what they would like, he and his ilk, this is what they would like to do to white people in the United States, Canada, Britain, and elsewhere. So, I mentioned last week that Dr. Bonnie, the latrine walla, who's been the effective dictator of my province of British Columbia for more than 2 years, graciously decided that purebloods like me are now allowed back into pubs, restaurants, theaters, and the like. Yay, thank you, Dr. Bonnie. So I am, for the first time since, July or August of last year, I'm actually going to go out and sit out on a patio and have something to eat and a couple of beers. I'm going to do that tonight. And hello to the Right Honorable, a new name to me, and hello to John Vance, Che Blutarski. Smoke on the Water playing on the radio represents 99% of all mention of Frank Zappa these days. Yeah, it's funny who survives and who doesn't. Hello to Daniel Maxwell, who quotes a Russian proverb, pray to God, but row to shore. Dan says, the summer of Kevin is imminent. Golly, I sure hope so. Russia has been hated since Putin stopped the looting of the country, says Che Blutarski. You win the internet. Okay, it's as simple as that. Well, I mean, there is the ethnic animus, but, oh no, Russia needs to be looted, and the oligarchs need to buy up everything valuable for pennies on the dollar. And of the oligarchs, I believe 7 major ones, and there was like 6.5 Jewish. That is not a blanket condemnation of Russian Jews or Jews in general, but you're not supposed to mention this because that makes you an anti-Semite. And so that's it for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow, and I will talk about the death of conservatism. Then didn't get around to it today. But there's always time to talk about the death of conservatism. Thank you all for tuning in. As always, greatly appreciated. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevinunderscoregrace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.